Please welcome Dr. Bernard Okok. He's a Peace and Justice Advisor at Africa Council of Religious Leaders from Kenya also. He was a Senior Advisor for Church and Interfaith Religions at World Vision International. He was also a Capacity Building Coordinator at Nairobi Peace Initiative in Africa. Yes, I think so.
Yes, I'm with you.
Could you please, I'm very excited, by the way, to know more about the types of hate speech in East Africa. Although all the policies and agendas from governments in East African governments to combat hate speech, why are those policies are not enough? So please, you have the floor for 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Matt, and Monica, thank you very much for a very detailed and very context-based illustration on the situation in Egypt. And I'll just pick it up from there, particularly when you talk about the element of legislation and the area of where policies can also come into place. And my presentation will be in a very broader way, giving some classical examples of the situations of hate speech, and also some of the practical areas that probably still reminisce to the issues that maybe may relate to violent situations, and some of them probably you have also talked about, really focusing on areas of violent extremism. So in just setting the tone for my presentation, maybe just also linking up to what you have really ably talked about, is looking at hate speech over and against freedom of expression, and also the ability to expose the ills of the society. And this is primarily in context with East African countries, in the sense that when somebody is probably a group of people or an individual, tries to expose some of the past ills that have taken place, whether it is social, economic, or political, then it can be termed within that political context as hate speech, an action or words or expressions or writings aimed at inciting or bringing up negative emotions. Then the second thing I would like us maybe to really delve into is who defines the parameters of hate speech. Yes, I'm going to talk about the international instruments vis-a-vis the national instruments as well, but who defines the parameters of hate speech within a particular political context? And you will be able to see in this presentation that within East African community, hate speech will be defined within a political context, and because political contexts are not static, they are dynamic, there is a possibility of it evolving. So one aspect of hate speech today can be not hate speech tomorrow, depending on the political context. Then the third thing I would like us also to look at is if hate speech can be litigated. Hate speech to me is an issue of social relations phenomena. It can only be litigated up to a particular level. Otherwise, it is now supposed to evolve to a social relations touching on issues of people's attitudes, perceptions, and belief systems. These are not parameters that can be permanently litigated. And I'm going to give examples of countries such as Rwanda or Ethiopia, or even my own country, Kenya. And again, Monica, I think, has also talked about the definitions and the manifestations of hate speech, which, if you look at it in itself, at the international instruments, it can make a lot of conviction and a lot of sense. But at the local level, it brings a little bit of a challenge in terms of understanding, in terms of the social background, and in terms of future aspirations, particularly within our region of East Africa. So how do we now define hate speech and its dynamics in East African region? Now, I want to look at two aspects here. On one hand, East African community or region is not in isolation, and therefore it is connected to, gets influenced by, and sometimes get a full orientation with various instruments at the international level or even at the continental level. So at the international level, on one hand, we have got these instruments such as Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. At the continental level, we have got instruments such as African Charter on Human and People's Rights and various regional ecumenical community bodies, including East African Community, West African, ECOWAS, SADC, and others. Now, when you look at the continental level, for example, we have got African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and I'm really happy that we have got an accomplished lawyer and advocates in the house here. So you find that within the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, it spells out human rights that can be individually enjoyed, but also can be communally or group enjoyed. It is not separable. It is, I mean, in Africa, we enjoy things as communities and as a group. And therefore, when we talk about hate speech must be targeted. It must target an individual within a particular group or within a group, but with that aspect of social and cultural connections. But what that is on one hand when we talk about international, regional, and continental instruments. But on the other hand, and this is where the rubber starts meeting the road, when it comes to the element of definition, manifestation, and advancement of instruments that mitigate issues of hate speech. Now, this is where we talk about the national legal frameworks, and this is where the policies also come in. The national legal frameworks which are developed and put in place to curtail or control certain actions, including the issues around hate speech. And you find that most East African countries are signatories to all the instruments that we have talked about that champion the issues of freedom of expression, issues of human rights, and issues of transparency and accountability. In the meantime, these national instruments are developed particularly when they are politically oriented on the safeguarding of individuals or national security. When we talk about the well-being of individuals, when a country such as Kenya says, we will not be able to accept certain things within the boundaries of Kenya, and they mention, the moment they mention the national security, I'm telling you, that is where probably you will find a contradiction between the national frameworks and the international instruments, because there is no way they can be able to open the space to the extent that its national and individual security are under threat. And therefore the question comes in that can the national security issues be sustainably guarded through laws and policies in terms of prevention of hate speech? Can we sustainably develop legal frameworks and policies against hate speech? Are these laws or policies on hate speech beyond political and personal interests? If so, then have we succeeded in ensuring that the legislation, policies, and laws that are developed and implemented have sustainably helped us prevent hate speech and helped us eradicate the manifestation of hate speech, such as the genocide? And this is where now I'm going into, in terms of just giving three classical examples of how probably we have tried to confront hate speech through legal frameworks and policies. And these are normally developed within the national context to control and contain the situations from breaking up or going beyond human positive social relations. And I'm calling policies and frameworks that are geared towards containing hate speech as first aid. They are merely to intervene in a particular situation of hate speech, which is probably potentially capable of driving communities to turbulence and social violence. But after creating that environment, then the legal policies and laws should not even be talked about. And examples here, Kenya, for example, when we went into post-election violence in 2007, 2008, we instituted an instrument called National Cohesion and Integration Commission. And this is the instrument that is supposed to, advance actions towards prevention of hate speech and actions towards taking those people who break the law of hate speech to court. So it is under that act that hate speech is defined and hate speech is prevented and hate speech is managed and sometimes litigated. Now, the only problem with this particular situation is that this was a political process. The prevention of post-election violence in 2007, 2008 was a political process, and therefore the definitions and the actions that were defined during at that particular time were politically oriented. Is it sustainable? Is it effective? I'm not so sure, because at the end of the day, you will be able to see that people will always try to remember what happened in the past, and they want these things being addressed. But the NCIC will tell you that when you bring them, it amounts to hate speech, it amounts to inciting communities, and it amounts to leverage on the issues of revenge. All of us are aware of the situation in Rwanda, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. And again, and here in 2008, two laws were developed, and these laws were relating to the punishment of crimes of genocide ideology. There is nothing wrong with that law, but you will find that there's very, very interesting scenarios when definitions are brought up. And this genocide ideology is defined as an aggregate of thoughts characterized by conduct, speeches, documents, and other acts aiming at exterminating or inciting others to exterminate other people. Now, that is still okay. When you come to the characteristics of crime of genocide ideology, which was formulated to ensure that the 1994 genocide do not occur again, under the tone of never again. Now, it comes out by saying that it is characterized in any behavior manifested by facts aimed at dehumanizing a person or a group of persons with the same characteristics in and among others, degrading through defamatory speeches. Now, for example, if somebody wants to address certain historical turbulence in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, and it is only seen to be going towards character assassination or telling people to address certain things of the past, then it can be termed as crime of genocide, and under that act. And that's simply meaning that people will be living within the environment of fear of not breaking the law, but they do not, in a holistic and in a joint way, accept that we have a past to deal with and we have a future to build. In the year 2020, that's last year in February, Ethiopian Parliament passed a proclamation aimed at countering hate speech. And this is also a very interesting regional dynamic in the sense that it terms hate speech as any speech that deliberately promotes hatred, discrimination, or attack against a person or a discernible group of identity based on ethnicity, religion, race, gender, or disability. You might find it very interesting that one of the issues around contestation currently between the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Ethiopian federal government is the question of equity, is the question of control, and is the question of authority. And all these are basically historical, because you will find that when Abiy Ahmed came to power in 2018, he embarked on a myriad and deep social, economic, and political reforms. And these reforms were viewed as destabilizing the status quo. And therefore, the Tigray People's Liberation Front and other groups felt that they are being pushed far and far away from power. And yet, you will find that there are some people who will also want certain historical injustices to be addressed. And that is why people see the law of 2020 as an impediment to them addressing some of the injustices that have occurred in the past. And therefore, the question would be, given these three examples, are policies adequate to sustainably address issues of hate speech? My point again will be very clear that policies and legal frameworks should only act as first aid response mechanisms. If you look at contexts such as Rwanda, the policies that have been put there, the legal frameworks that have been developed and are being implemented have adequately contributed to first aid phenomena of ensuring that the country comes to a stable environment where now we need to focus on changing people's attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions, working on the acceptable alternative frameworks, working on the processes of ensuring that the past negative memories are adequately addressed and jointly accepted, and the people start working on their future. And therefore, I want to put my agenda to this forum, that policies and legal frameworks are not sufficient and not sustainable in addressing issues and questions around hate speech, but they provide an environment upon which people can realign their relations, can define their communication systems, and engage in building a formidable future that have got that element of acceptance. And therefore, policies are not enough, but create an environment for the development and shaping and redefining attitude, perception, and belief systems capable of making hate speech not valuable in our society. Whether this is a possible future or not, I leave it to you to engage on. Thank you so much, Maat, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for your fruitful presentation. You tackled the very important points related to the types of hate speech and contradiction between hate speech and freedom of expression. Very, very exciting about all of that. And I think the point you raised, that policies and legislations are not enough, and they are, we can consider them as first aid responses, is very, very important, especially in Africa, because the African context is very, I think it's different about the other contexts. So thank you very much. If I have a question, if I can make a question, how can you see? How can we fight? How can we fight the role of Al-Shabaab movement in Somalia and Kenya also? How can we stop them, from your point of view, from spreading hate speech among Kenyan, Somalian, and East African youth, especially?
Thank you very much, Matt, for that. And this is where probably you link now the first aid action and sustainable community engagement response processes. And you will find that groups such as Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and even when you talk about Al-Qaeda and ISIS at the global level, you'll find that these groups, operate based on emotions, and emotions either which are triggered from historical and social grievances. And therefore, how to confront the hate speech that are normally, propagated by these groups is to engage in a acceptable community processes of alternatives. What is the alternative? For example, when an Al-Shabaab or a group or a violent group such as Boko Haram talks about the, brings about the phenomena that we are being discriminated against because of our religious or social identity. What is the alternative that you put on the table? And it is this alternative that communities will be able to use and apply to confront those hate speech situations. I've just finished a resource material on what we call a comprehensive alternative narratives to countering or to prevention of violent extremism. And we are talking about the issues of people buying into and acting based on these issues of hate speech because they don't have an alternative means of belief. They don't have alternative means of actions. And this hate speech primarily will always be pegged on social, political, and economic, or sometimes religious, historical, and contemporary grievances. So that is how I would look at it. Purely alternative spaces for actions, engagements, and development.
Very well. Thank you very much, Bernard. And please stay with us until we finish. Maybe you can have some questions. Is the biggest role in confronting hate speech on the citizens who receive these speeches or on the governments? Who should be responsible for that? Dr. Bernard, I think you can have this question. Is the biggest role? Are you here, Bernard?
Yes. Are you calling me to act on that?
Yes. If you have
is this the question from Yasmin?
Yasmin, yes. Please.
All right. Yes, I think I tried to write something on the chat box, but my input there would be very, very categorical in terms of looking at the government and its institutions as duty bearers. They have got some certain duties and responsibilities upon the citizens and the environment which citizens live. And therefore, the government as a duty bearer has got that legislative and policy framework role. It can't force the issues around social relations to their manifestation. So it is just a matter of giving that principles and environment of operations. But the biggest and the sustainable role in terms of addressing issues around hate speech lies within the communities and the citizens. And when the communities and citizens are empowered to the extent that they come to know the importance of not engaging in or advancing hate speech between and among each other, then that becomes sustainable. So the citizens and communities are right holders, and therefore they also hold the power to control and mitigate and even stop the issues of hate speech. The government as the duty bearer has got the responsibilities of creating that environment of citizens and communities playing their active role. And that's why you'll realize that the presentation by Rosilla talking about religious leaders mobilizing and empowering communities and congregations to play their role accountably and with certain responsibilities. That's how I'll say look at it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think also Yasmin have another question, but you answered that question in your presentation. Are national and regional efforts in Africa sufficient to address hate speech directed at African youth? So I think you tackled it, but if you have any other thing to add.
No, it's okay. I don't know.
No, very well. Thank you very much, Bernard, for answering this question. Thank you. The question from Khalid. How can African civil society organization contribute to the eradication of hate speech? And I think Bernard can answer this question, but please in 1 minute, because we don't have too much time.
Thank you, Basha. One thing you have to know that African civil society organizations are part and parcel of the community, and therefore they interact with the community members on a day-to-day basis. One thing they need to do in a very short and form of it is that hate speech can arise also as a result of not knowing, people not having the ability to communicate effectively and conflict sensitively. And therefore, the African civil society can advance conflict and context-sensitive communication and the do no harm principles within the communities, whether it is faith communities or within the civil society community. So in short, they can advance what I'm calling conflict and context-sensitive behaviors and the do no harm principles approaches to issues in the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please stay with me. Now we will have like one important recommendation, or the most important recommendation from your point of view. For everyone, just tell me one recommendation from point of view that we must start with after this webinar. Bernard, you can continue. One important recommendation, the most important from your point of view. Unmute yourself, please.
All right. The most important recommendation I can make here is let us do a critical analysis on what hate speech means to communities in Africa and look at the gaps and challenges that come with the implementation of international instruments, because not everything within the international instrument, including those laws and policies and protocols, can really fit within the African context. So let us analyze the context, let us look at the gaps and challenges, and let us respond based on the needs rather than assumptions. Thank you.
Very well, very well. Thank you very much.